When we think about culture or beliefs, a lot of times the first things that come to our mind are the immediate things we notice around us, the way people dress or the way they talk. It might be the things that they like to eat or the way they greet one another. It's the rituals and it's the activities that are a part of the culture. And we see it around us all the time. But in reality, that's only a small part of culture. It's like an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. Only 10% of the iceberg is actually seen above the water. The 90% of the iceberg is actually beneath the surface of the water. And so culture is very much the same. There are so many understandings and beliefs that are beneath the surface that we may not even be aware of, but we adopt because they're so much a part of us. And we don't necessarily realize they are there until those beliefs are challenged or we're introduced to someone who believes differently than us. I remember being on a training trip in East Asia, and we were doing an activity where the people had to practice a specific skill in working with children. And so one of the first persons to demonstrate this was the leader of the group. He got up and he did it, and after he was done, we gave some constructive criticism. There was a lot of good things, but there were a few small things he could do better. We thought it was a great session. But at the break, our translator came back to the room and this normally very gentle, mild-mannered man was livid, angry, and he said, "Don't you ever do that again." And we were shocked. We were like, "Do what?" We had not thought we had done anything wrong. And he said, "You corrected the leader in front of all the people." He says, "You caused shame upon this leader, someone that everyone else looks up to." We had not thought of it because in our cultural understanding, it's okay to correct someone, even if it's a superior, someone who's over you. But we had done a major cultural problem. Our cultural worldview had clashed with another culture that was quite different from our own. It was a very humbling lesson to learn, to be honest. But it helped us realize that we don't necessarily become aware of what we believe until we're somewhere else. It's like asking a fish. There's a Chinese proverb that says, if you want to know what water is, don't ask the fish. And this is true because a fish is immersed in water. It's all the fish knows. And the only way a fish will truly understand what water is to be moved out of the water and be flapping on the side, on the land, and gasping for breath to truly understand his culture or what is around him. And the same is true with us in worldview. Worldview is basically, it's like this set of glasses. It's a lens by which we view everything around us. It's the values we have, the beliefs we have, the things we come to know as truth. Marty McCullough writes, "Worldview is a set of beliefs that form a framework for making sense out of life and the world. These beliefs are the answers we hold to the basic questions of life that give meaning to everything we do." So worldview matters. Worldview, because Christians look at everything from a spiritual perspective, worldview is spiritual. It's going to impact what we believe is true, our values, the things that are important to us, and it will touch every aspect of our heart, our mind, and ultimately our actions. I remember seeing a painting back from Paul Gauguin, who was a French painter in the 19th century. And he titled his painting, "Where Do We Come From? What Are We? And Where Are We Going?" It was an interesting title to a painting, but I think he was trying to capture the essence of human existence. And those questions and the answers to those questions form our worldviews. So let's look at the three predominant worldviews that we find in the world today. The first worldview is secularism, and this is the worldview of many of the Western modern cultures. It's also the worldview of communist ideology countries. And so in this worldview, God and the existence of God is denied. Anything spiritually is looked as being nothing at all. They believe that life is the result of just the interactions of matter and energy, the Big Bang and evolution. It's time, it's chance. And for a secularist, the material world is the ultimate reality. They don't believe that there are universal truths or any absolute morals. So if we think of those 3 questions from Gauguin's painting, where do we come from? Well, it's just matter and energy that has come together. What are we? Well, we're a collection of matter, or a collection of electrons and protons and molecules. And where are we going? Nowhere. When you die, that's it. That's done. The second worldview is what we would call animism. And animism is what we find in tribal parts of the world, but we also see animism being played out in Hinduism and even in Buddhism. And in the animistic worldview, spirits animate, or they are living in everything. And so everything around is spiritual. And everything is moving toward this oneness of spirit. The material world might be seen as bad or not important because the spiritual world is so important. The real world is the unseen world. The truth is hidden, it's mysterious, and it cannot always be understood. And so there's evil around, and much might be done to make the spirit world happy. And human beings are at the mercy of these unseen forces. So we see this in many aspects of the world, not just in tribal or primitive societies, but also in some of the modern societies. Where do people come from? Well, they either come from the earth, from the things that are in the world around them, or some animists believe that they're coming out of a cycle of reincarnation. They've been reincarnated from a previous life. What are we? Well, we're spirits that are in temporary bodies, but we're subject to the forces and the spirit world that is all around us. And where are we going? For most animists, we're going in circles. You do your best and you hope that in the next life you're going to be something better and eventually achieving this nothingness or nirvana. There's no hope in the future of an animist. And the third worldview is what we call theism. And that's the belief in one God. We see this in Christianity. We see it also in Judaism and Islam. But we're going to focus on Christian theism for this talk. It's the idea that God is one, but that he is also personal and that he's relational. He created the universe. He created the spiritual world and the material world. He is the one that has the ultimate truth. He reveals the truth to us, and we can know truth because we know him. God's character establishes the absolutes, and he is that one infinite God. So where did we come from? Well, we've been created by God. We're in his image, both physically and spiritually. What are we? Well, we are his children. We are made like him. And where are we going? God has a place. For those who follow and believe in him, there is an eternal home or an eternal judgment for those who do not believe. So these main worldviews will shape everything that we look at. It might shape the way people view technology, sexuality, the environment. All of these things would answer differently. All of these worldviews would answer differently depending upon how they look at the world. So what does this mean for us as we go into children's ministry? Well, I think first of all, we need to understand the worldview coming out of God's big story. You see, Jesus said that he was the truth and that he would guide us into all truth. Jesus said, the truth will set you free. And so much of the brokenness we see in the world around us is because of what Satan has done to distort God's truth. That truth was distorted back in Genesis chapter 3 with Satan, who deceived Adam and Eve. He twisted the truth. And ever since then, that truth is being twisted. And people are believing distortions of truth. And so when we look at God's big story, this is truth. And we want people to understand this big story as they combat the different worldviews that are happening in the world. We believe that truth is in God's word. However, if we approach worldview with just little bits and pieces of God's story, we pick a story here from the Bible or there, or we pick a few moral truths or promises that make us feel good, we miss something really critical, and it doesn't help us or the children we serve develop a worldview that can stand strong with others. Goheen says, we have fragmented the Bible into bits, moral bits, systematic theological bits, devotional bits, historical bits, narrative bits, homiletical bits. And when the Bible is broken up in this way, there is no comprehensive grand narrative to withstand the power of the comprehensive humanistic nature and narrative that shapes our culture. We need to understand the whole story and embrace it and see God's movement from wholeness, the brokenness of sin, and how he's seeking to bring that wholeness back. That has to be the narrative that guides and shapes everything that we do. So when we think about this, it's going to impact. And when we clash with other worldviews, even when we share the gospel with people who come from other worldviews, we need to realize that it's very difficult for them to just accept a story, a narrative that is different than what they have been raised with. Sometimes people will take pieces of what we talk about and adapt it or adopt it into their own understanding. Or others will just add it to what they already believe. And we see that in synchronism in some of the cultures around, where they take a bit of this religion and a bit of that religion, and they try to make something work for themselves. We have to be cautious as we seek to minister to people that might not share a worldview, especially a biblical worldview. But what does this mean as we go now to children and serving children and helping children? I think if we want our kids to grow up following Christ, we need to help equip them with a biblical worldview. And I want to suggest a few ideas for how that might happen. We have to realize, first of all, how critical it is to help our children develop a biblical worldview. It's been suggested that a child's worldview or basic belief system is pretty much in place by the time they are 13, and it's likely to change very much from that time. And that should be a sobering thing for us to realize, that we have this window of time to make a big impact in the lives of children and helping them shape that worldview. George Barna, who has done research with people in North America, especially with children, has also noted that of the children he has interviewed or that he has surveyed, that only about 3% of them are actually holding a biblical worldview and are integrating it into the decisions they're making in their lives. We need to do something different, because the worldview around our children, whether it's secularist or whether it's animist or whatever the prevailing ideologies are, they are shaping our children if we are not. So what can we do? First of all, I think we need to take a look at God's story. We need to make sure we understand this grand narrative that God has created and have it deep within ourselves as parents or as children's ministry leaders. We need to make it the foundation of our worldview so that we're looking through that lens of the Bible being what our children need to use as a guide for life. We need to look at ourselves carefully and say, is my worldview biblical? Do I really live out the things that the Bible are teaching? Because children watch us. They're looking at how we're modeling faith. They're looking at how we make decisions, how we manage things. And if our worldview is not something that's a part of our lives, they will see that. They will connect with that, and they will understand and adopt what they see us modeling. The second thing we need to do is consider our goals. When you think about the ministry you're doing with children, are we really encouraging them to think critically? Sometimes we're just feeding them stories and saying, this is what it means, this is what it means. But we're not encouraging them to ask questions about, how does this intersect with what I'm learning at school or what the children down the street are saying to me? Are we giving them the ability to ask those tough questions? How does God's view speak into this issue that I hear all around me in the world today? We need to help our children learn to think better, to ask those tougher questions, and be able to weigh what they believe with what others may be saying is true. We also need to consider our goals in the sense of, are we open to the wrong answer? Think about that. Are we open to children disagreeing with us, or to doubting, or not really understanding or seeing how it applies? Many times in our children's ministry, we discourage children from asking questions, from doubting, from wondering about things, or trying to make sense of it. We're just saying, this is what you should believe. But does that do justice to the spiritual growth of our children? Dave Chinos and Ivy Beckwith have written, children's questions matter, and how we handle their questions matter. When we treat children's questions with respect, we are treating that child with respect. And we are teaching them that it's okay to ask questions. Our children do ask questions, but are we allowing them to ask them of us so that we can help them shape that biblical worldview as they are growing and shaping it within themselves, as they are going through that process of making faith their own? The other thing we need to consider is, what are the goals? What are the outcomes? What are we trying to achieve with the children in our ministry? Are we just trying to have them learn more? Is knowledge the goal? I hope not, because following Jesus is much more than just knowledge. Well, could it be obedience? Well, we want our children to obey the truth of God, but often that's something that's probably best taught to the younger ones. Could it be that we want them to be developing character? Well, of course, we want our children to develop character, but we want them to understand why it is we ask them to exhibit or develop these character qualities. For instance, we say, we want you to be kind, but it's because God is kind. When we know the character of God, we're going to know what the character needs to be in a child's life. I think ultimately we need to help our children grow in discernment. Yes, knowledge. Yes, obedience. Yes, character development. But to discern. To say this Bible, this Word of God makes a difference because I need to make a difference in my world with all these worldviews that are bombarding me and challenging me to think different than what God has challenged me to think. And so this way we can help our children distinguish what's right and wrong, the difference between truth and lies, what is good and what is bad. You see, we don't want to just make our children obedient Christians. We want them to help them form a worldview that is grounded in the truth of who God is, and it's grounded in what the scriptures teach. And that will help them as they grow up as disciples in a world that is not a biblical worldview.